2024. We're grateful for those that are in attendance. This is a Digital World Town Hall meeting for private members that are associated therein. Some of the things we may be looking at or talking about are forward-looking concepts around a simple model that uses decentralized storage and architecture that connects in users into that decentralized storage and architectures. The storage is actually not just literally not just a single server instance, but you've got transactions as well as validators, as well as storage that all tie into a unique ecosystem that is very simple for users to understand and use once they actually see it and understand it. So we're grateful for those that are taking time to understand some of the things that have happened over the last week and some of the progress. We continue to mature what's called the Oceanic Coalition movement, which has a couple more, they've actually reached out based upon some videos that they saw over the last week or so. So there's two more projects that we're focusing on. And so we'll talk a little bit more about those as we continue to mature. It's, again, there's different partners within this coalition. Some of them are private organizations, some of them are public countries, and really just coming together with whether it's kingdoms or nations or states that maybe even want to turn into nations. As you know, that when we're at a wartime, there's an opportunity for kind of the reshuffling of cards, and we see that in historical wars. And one of the thoughts are that in the short period in front of us, that there will be war, world war, and it's not just one country, it's not just isolated to different regions, as we're currently seeing now three major hotspots within the world. But as things actually come and settle down, you'll also see systems that will basically be maturing and become an option during that time frame. So before the war started, there were a lot of different ecosystems. For instance, people saw within Ukraine a system around identity and governance that was centralized called DIA, D-I-I-A. And that actually was well in advance of the invasion with, at least the recent invasion with Russia. But as we see it, there's a legal system, lawful system, and the lawful system has different history, such as maritime law that's found in the sea, law of the land, which is similar to colonial law and similar systems that we see with civil and criminal type law systems. And then also law of the air, which some folks look at businesses or trusts or how those ecosystems work. But they basically snap into these different environments. And historically, we've seen within different regions, so this is an example of a map where there's different regions that we focus within. Actually, here's a more mature one that's kind of advancing. There's two more targets within this ecosystem that we're currently working on, but you can kind of see it as it continues to mature there. One of the ones that is actually pretty much completely able to be self-sufficient on its own is the Hawaiian Kingdom. And you can see full-blown apps within the Android ecosystem, within the Apple ecosystem, and within the Clear ecosystem. You don't have to have a Clear phone to run this. You can do it on Apple or Android. Then you can kind of see some of the goals, particularly as it relates for per year, and then really focused on decentralization and different apps that can actually enable a new identity system, as well as a new finance system for these different jurisdictions. This particular one is around Hawaii. You'll see additional ones. This one is actually not completely matured. This is a version 2, if you will. I'll go see it and see if I can let this individual in. So this is basically Tuvalu and some of the advancements there. They just got a new leadership team, and so we actually had an opportunity this last week to meet with some of the members of that new leadership team. When I say leadership, they got new prime minister, new parliament, new ministers. They've gone through their full cycle, and they've started to put them in place. And we'll currently be working with some of the new advanced leadership therein. And this is actually a version 2 site that will actually hopefully stand up within that ecosystem. It's not completed yet, so I'd like to at least bring in some of the individuals there. Some of the other advancements are not just within the coalition itself, but other organizations or entities. So Aotearoa, for those that are not aware, was the native land of what is now known as New Zealand. Kind of like Vanuatu, you see name, New Hermades, that is changed to the native land when you see different colonial-based sources leaving. So in Vanuatu, you actually saw France as well as Britain leave within the last 2 decades, and those that were there for the last 3,500 years basically be able to stand up their own old culture again, their indigenous culture that they had prior. And you're seeing something, at least starting processes within the framework within Aotearoa. So this is the original Maori ecosystem, and there's even more depths of words around what the Maori ecosystem is before that, but you're starting to see a framework of that being stood up. The applications are not deployed yet, but the actual front end and some of the historical groundwork to be able to stand that environment up, which is not appropriate to go through in this meeting, has been started. And it's not just this last year, it's been over the last decade by some very capable and accountable and responsible people that have been doing that within that ecosystem. You'll see 2 prime ministers that basically resigned within there. You have John Keyes. Give me just a quick second. This is a key gentleman down in Haiti. Hey, I'm on a call, but I think it'd be valuable for you to join if you had cycles. It was in a link that I sent you. It's streaming live, so it'd be good for you to jump on and just provide an update on what's going on within Haiti. Yeah, jump into that. Jump into that. We'll see you there. Okay? Okay, bye. So this was the gentleman we were hopeful to get involved. He's actually deep history. His bloodlines are back to the royal folks within the Hawaiian or the Haitian ecosystem. And as you all know, there's some real hot spots going on there. And I've worked with him for about the last 2 years, and he's always been, Mike, you gotta get the system down to Haiti. And so some of the things that are happening there's been some compelling events. I'll let him talk a lot about that as he comes in, but I think you'll like getting to know him, and he's a solid fellow traveler, and we could actually have him join some of these town halls as we mature, as it goes through. So hopefully, I don't know if there's other moderators, but it would be valuable if other moderators could just let these folks in, but there we go. Perfect. Farhad, welcome. We're actually just going over some of the advancements within Aotearoa/New Zealand, and we're grateful to have you join. We're going to ask for an update on at least as what you're seeing in Haiti, and then maybe talk a little bit about how that may relate over to what we call the Oceanic Coalition. You and I have talked a lot about that and your potential involvement in that. So we'd love to get your perspective as things are kind of hot within the Haiti environment. I'll go ahead and wrap up on Aotearoa. So Aotearoa, again, for those that are not aware, Aotearoa is the native name for what is now known or historically known as New Zealand. And the Maoris there, they have a treaty called the Treaty of Waitangi, which is actually something that is defined between the Maori people, Aotearoa, and New Zealand. And has it been lived up to? No. Has it been argued? Yes. Is it in compliance? Whole nother conversation. But there has been a process that's been followed around letters patent and the Hague and the Vatican and other ecosystems and recognition. And you'll start seeing a lot of noise there. What you're seeing here is basically just the back end systems for what the front end systems will be doing within New Zealand/Aotearoa. So it'll take time, but you're seeing that framework stand up. Identity system, finance system, asset management system, how coexisting environments can actually operate. So how you can have vehicles that are registered in different environments that are managed, but then at the same time integrated into the existing system, so that if there is things that are foul play, everyone basically has systems that provide knowledge and insights that keep, they use this cliche, keeping them safe, so to speak. So that's a pretty advanced part of things that are currently moving forward there. You'll also see some wonderful things within the Kingdom of Indonesia and some of the advancements there. There's this is not the right time to go into details on this particular one, but this has started standing up, and there's some very key elements there. This is a new one that we haven't talked about, but within the last week, we've been requested to get involved with. And it's basically the Texas state turning into the Texas or Texan nation. So if you haven't been following that, about 30 years before the Hawaiian Kingdom was taken over, so coming up on about 200 years, Texas had the opportunity to become a state. And when they did it, they also asked for succession rights. So if they voted with a certain quantity of votes, which you can kind of see a lot of pledges and votes starting to happen within this ecosystem here. So these are not just votes for people saying, hey, we want it to separate, but these are actually ecosystems of very solid people within the community that are saying, we want our land back, we want our country back, and we want to leave the United States. Primarily, a lot of it has to do with not just financial matters or political matters, but as they relate to the border. And you could say, well, those are financial matters and political matters, but they're actually three different ecosystems that are spinning plates, because there's crime and massive other things that come from it. So as you know, where there's accountability and responsibility, which equals liberty, you really have to have those basic fundamental elements around responsibility and accountability. And what you're seeing right now is a population that is looking to stand up and actually pushing through legislation and specific votes to be able to have this come to fruition. But they need a system that they can basically do that on. And so what you're seeing here is the ability for Texans to actually stand up. And similar systems that we've seen, instead of the Hawaiian dala, it would be the Texan dilo. So different currencies, different assets, similar things that most of you are already very familiar with. A lot of people, this may be a new concept, but you basically have an asset that can actually one-to-one relate or transfer into the US dollar equivalent and into other currencies at exchange market rates in real time. But it's not just a financial system. It's also an identity management system that ties to companies, organizations, individuals, land, as well as vehicles. So this may be the first time that some folks are seeing this, but we do have a manufacturer of vehicles within this state. Soon, hopefully it'll be a nation/country. And there may be some very interesting things that can happen there, primarily because it's not just a matter of managing the vehicle for the individual that's within the ecosystem, but how it actually gets registered, how it gets licensed, how it gets managed, and where you've got folks within that ecosystem, that physical state of the Texan border today that would actually align with this type of thing and start rolling it out and deploying it. You're going to see some interesting alignments in real world use cases. There's also many indigenous environments between these 2 points that we just showed you. I can't go specific today, but it wasn't just the Haitian opportunity this last week or the Texan opportunity this last week, but there's also some elements within BRICS. So we're going to have some questions here, though, because BRICS, there's 2 different paths that we can go down as the digital world, looking to be a service provider within BRICS, or the digital world actually standing up to be a member within this ecosystem, but in such a way where the value that it brings in are let's back up and look at the difference between a country and a nation. What is the difference? Does anybody know what the differences are? I'll just kind of throw that out there. Anybody know? Anybody know what the difference is?
I would say that a nation probably is a people, they may not have a land, and a country actually is a people tied to the land, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I did not. Let me see if I can throw it.
But I'd like to say hi to everyone and thank you for having me.
Let me do a quick intro for this, since we're throwing that out there.
Hey, Mike.
Also, Mike, could I?
Yeah, so we've actually.
A nation is more than one people in the place that each in a country. A country is basically like one race of people or one basically people there. That's the difference.
Okay, these are both very, very good answers, and you're both actually correct. But really Bernard, which I'd like to do a formal introduction to this man because he definitely deserves it. But Bernard answered this absolutely spot on 100% correctly. A nation and a country could always be used synonymously, but as far as a term goes, but a nation actually doesn't necessarily have to be confined to one specific border set. So a country has a specific border set and specific, in some ways they call them nationals or citizens, but in all reality, they're a people. But just like Bernard said, and even George said, it doesn't have to be confined to a particular region. So you could have multiple nationals that are in multiple regions and they're assigned to the same ecosystem. And that's why we talk about people within the digital world that go all the way through, the whole process of becoming a member and then a resident and then a citizen / then to a national. It's really a national perspective that we're talking about, not a citizen. A citizen is kind of like a slave. Not kind of. It really does tie to that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that slavery topic as we get into this. But I want to just pause here and I want to introduce Bernard. Bernard is an individual that is amazing. He's young, but he's got fire in the belly. And the first time that I met him was in DC, and we continued to meet him year over year for the last 3 years in DC. And his bloodlines go back to Haitian roots that are phenomenal. And I'll have him go through some of the history there. And as things are going crazy in Haiti right now, I think it's very important for us to hear directly from him, his perspective of, one, how we got here, and two, how we can improve and maybe even stand upon right principles, morals, and virtues so that the Haitians actually have something to come out of this instead of just being stepped on and oppressed and abused and raped and pillaged. And, I won't even go into the details, but Haiti, my personal family, my foster family lived in Haiti in Port-au-Prince for 2 years. Wonderful people. He currently lives with his family over in Africa in the Ivory Coast. But when he lived there, his name is Pascal, and he speaks Polyglot Français, and so was able to plug into the Creole stuff really well. But make a long story short, my eyes were open to what real poverty and suffering was on one hand, but on the other hand, it was open to people that were even had an element of free that was unknown. So, but fast forward now a decade, and here we are with not just Haiti starting up with eruption, but you've got things in the Middle East, you've got things in Ukraine, you've got things within the Russian ecosystem. And some folks say, hey, no, things are just continuing to be normal. But in all reality, the bet is, and the prediction is, we will head in, these issues that are currently being realized are not just going to start disappearing and solving themselves. We're going to go into what the world will look at as World War III, where there is conflicts, where there is issues globally. Wars, real wars, rumors of wars, concerns like we haven't understood in our lifetime. And currently we're seeing many missiles that are going off and alarms that are going off from Russia to Ukraine and the Israel area and Jordan area, but we're not seeing nuclear weapons being used yet. And there are stockpiles. We're talking some countries with over 5,000 nuclear warheads, many countries with those types of quantities. And here we are at the precipice of a couple of countries. We just went through a coalition ecosystem that then ties into, oceanic countries such as Tuvalu, Vanuatu, Fiji, the Hawaiian Kingdom, which is it's the Hawaiian archipelago of islands, so to speak. And then now we're talking about a state, Texas, separating from the United States of America. And we're seeing countries like Haiti that are just going through utter chaos. But they all have one thing in common. They're all connected in some form to the ocean. As we all are. We get to live on this sphere that floats around in the universe, and we get to live on this rock that the ocean is actually what gives us life. No matter what you believe from a scientific standpoint or evolution standpoint, it's very important where we come from in the waters per se. So with that being said, Bernard, if you could just run us through maybe a history of how Haiti has gotten to where it's gotten, and how you believe, from your understanding of economics, identity, freedom, systems, technology, how you see things
Sure.
coming together. So go ahead, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here with everyone. I'm Bernard Henry Poitevin, born in New York, grew up in Haiti. I was my grandmother. She is a visionary beyond my imagination, with tremendous gift. Since the time I was born, she told my mother that this kid has something special for Haiti and for the world, that I'm going to raise them in Haiti. So she snatched me from my father and my mom. My father ended up spending like 2-3 years not speaking to her because he wanted to raise his kid in New York with his wife. But that brought me close to nature, farming, and I come from a family of 7th, 8th generation of farmers, descendant of Toussaint Louverture, the great immortal Toussaint Louverture, who was a general of the Spanish armies, starting in the 1760s. Then he was first named Toussaint Breda, but his name Louverture because he was able to find openings, impossible openings in the ranks of the enemies, and to his advantage. So Louverture means opening. So he was able to convince this. Spanish was the biggest army, so he left Spain to join the French because the French, he noticed, were more humane. As a general of the Spanish army, at the time, Spain controlled from 1492 to 1690s, late 90s, 92 or 97. It was only Spain that covered all the Americas, North, Central, South. And the most prosperous colony has been Haiti forever, with iridium, with gold, walking on gold, and cacao, coffee, sugarcane, and all these commodities at the time were valued as the same price of gold. So a kilogram of cacao or sugar or coffee was the same price of a kilogram of gold. And this is one of the reasons Haiti was able to finance so many countries and liberate so many countries, financing them with coffee, cacao, and gold. The U.S. was created by Toussaint Louverture. They don't say in the story. He wrote the Constitution of the U.S. The U.S. was his pilot project, the proof of concept. And how that happened is, as I was saying earlier, he was general of the Spanish army. He initially, his grandfather was king of the Alada kingdom of Benin. And the father has also a brother who's a king of the kingdom of Dahomey, Benin, West Africa. So instead of Toussaint being born prince to soon be king, his mother got kidnapped, put on a ship, and he was born a slave. But his master was a Spanish master, liberal Spanish master. Fortunately for Toussaint, who was born there, noticed that the kid was a genius. And he happened to be the best horse rider and the best coachman since the age of 8, 9. So the master Breda decided to make him the first free slave of the Americas. And he went to school. He went to military school. He always aced, and he became general of the Spanish army. The island was called Hispaniola, which means Little Spain. España and Hispaniola. Now, for 200 years of exploitation, Toussaint starts getting involved in the 1700s. French noticed that Spain is so powerful, they have to come and get a piece of the pie. So they arrive in Port-au-Prince. That's when Toussaint realized that when the Spanish was raping the women, the slave women, the babies that resulted out of that, they killed because they didn't want any mixed blood. But the French, they kept the baby alive and they freed the mother because it was their blood. So that's when the idea came in Toussaint's head to betray the Spanish army to join the French, because he were treating people that were similar to him, his people. He was black, but he was free, but the others were black and slaves. So he joined the French. He convinced the French. He says, look, I'm general of the Spanish army. I'm controlling Canada, USA, South America. Now you want to come in, you're fighting for territory on the island. If I'm your general, I'll beat Spain and you'll have more land. So the French allowed him to become general. That's where he had his best friend, Alexandre Dumas Sr. Alexandre Dumas Sr. was born on, now that Toussaint is general of the French army, the island changed names from Hispaniola to Ile de Saint-Domingue, because that's Toussaint's power. Now he made the French the top dog. He's like a LeBron. No matter team he goes, he makes the team number one. So now the Spanish are talking to Toussaint and wants to get Toussaint back. So they tell Toussaint, in order to get you back, I'll cede over my crown and my kingdom to you and plead allegiance. So Toussaint accepts. And Toussaint says, I'll accept under one condition, that we free all the slaves. So Spain started bringing more weapon and ammunition to Toussaint, and Toussaint started training the slaves starting in 1776. Now, his best friend, Alexandre Dumas Sr., because Toussaint had more relationship with the Americas, going from Haiti to the US or Canada or South America, his counterpart, his best friend, Alexandre Dumas, had more relationship with France and Europe. But there were two generals. One each had, and Alexandre Dumas had his son, Alexandre Dumas Jr., who he sent to France with the mother for better education in France. Later, Alexandre Dumas Jr. wrote The Count of Monte Cristo and the Three Musketeers, all made by Haitians that they stole from us, and they're not telling you. But if you Google, you'll see that Alexandre Dumas was born on the island of Saint-Domingue, Ile de Saint-Domingue, Haiti. The Three Musketeers were never Frenchmen. They were the three black men. Alexandre Dumas' father, the general, Toussaint Louverture, the other general, and Toussaint's protege, Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Now that Alexandre Dumas goes back and forth to France, he discovers a book that the book was written by the author, Diderot, Diderot, and Reynard, Rawnard. And the book is titled Philosophies Between the Two Indies. Because initially when the Spanish and the French came to Haiti, they thought they came to India. They thought it was the west side of India. This is why the Caribbean is called West Indies. They were dumbfounded that just the subtropical, it was tropical weather and same trees and so many things. So they thought they were in the Indies. So that book said, if we continue to exploit men by men for no pay, this system of slavery is not sustainable. It will blow up in our face. It will have created its own antidote, a black Spartacus, of a black Julius Caesar. So when his best friend, when Alexandre Dumas left France with that book, he brought it to Toussaint because he saw in Toussaint a messiah. And he knew that the book was going to inspire Toussaint. So when Toussaint read that book, he says, but I am that black Spartacus. I am this black Julius Caesar. So now I have to train those slaves to beat the French, beat the Spanish, and beat the British. So he trained the slaves from 1776 until 1791. The French Revolution started over there. Also, Dumas brought wind to Toussaint's ear, telling him, you know, there's this new concept. It's called revolution. At the time, this concept was like the internet. It was like blockchain. They're like, what? We can rebel to our masters? Are you kidding me? You know? So they're like, yeah, we can do that. We can say no. We can say we can fight back. So, all right, they're going to try the proof of concept. So Toussaint trains, after training the slaves, he takes 500 of them, brings them to New Orleans on the ship. This is why you see the Haitian Creole, the spicy food, the voodoo. It's right there, you know? So he trains and he wins. He trains the Americans. Toussaint was the Sun Tzu of the Americas. So he trains all the Americans. He wins the war. He puts George Washington president. He writes the Constitution, goes back to Haiti, frees Haiti. And then Napoleon, well, the Rothschild at the time is evolving in Germany. So you have Meyer Amschel Bayer, who changed his name to Red Shield in English and German, Rothschild, because they were Knight Templars. Well, they believed in that sect. Remember, they started also with the Zionists and their secret sauce: spying, blackmailing, divide to conquer. 3 things. Everywhere they go. The Zionists, the first place they tried to settle was in Africa and Uganda. They got kicked out. They went to Ethiopia. They created havoc there. They also, now they went to Germany. They went to Russia. They went to Ukraine. They're going all over as a nation of people, creating havoc all the way they're going. And in order for them, now the father, who was a loan shark, he has his son, Amschel Meyer Bayer, who changed his name to Amschel Meyer Rothschild, and goes into saying, I'm not going to be lending like my father used to do, retail lending. Let me do wholesale lending to governments or to the kingdoms. But in order to have a foot in, he couldn't enter the court yards. He had to find his way in, which was to spying and blackmailing. This is where the Epstein comes in. This is why when Hitler discovered he wanted to kill but because the Jews and the Zionists, they control all the media and all the entertainment, they never let that side of Hitler come out. They only made Hitler look like a crazy guy.
Anybody
again,
seeing a parallel here? One of the questions.
Yes, it's making so much. Yes,
it really does.
It's all tied to slavery.
Mm-hmm.
It's all tied to modern slavery, banking. And at the time when the Rothschilds are giving this new banking system to the kingdoms, they're saying, we're going to put some unfavorable laws into it. First law is that we're going to make a debt more powerful than an asset. And we're going to, on top of that, put interest. So it doesn't make any sense that you have an asset, you have a building that's 100-story, you had so much brick, mortar, cement, and iron. If the building actually took you $100 million worth of material to build it, and you owe $100,000 of taxes on it, and the $100,000 has more power to take over your $100 million assets, and you're okay with it because it's the law. It's a Rothschild law. It's a banking law. First, is the real way it should happen is that you owe $100,000. I liquidate my $100 million. I paid $100,000 with interest for law damage. I sell. I could buy now with $99 million. I buy another property with less taxes. But everybody's sleeping since 300 years. We're walking, sleeping.
Well, you could even go as far to say, what's the difference between 1776 and 2024?
Correct.
What's the difference?
Correct. It's the same. We've invented, and it reminds me of a French guy. I remember when I landed in Charles de Gaulle, I got picked up by a taxi cab, and here we are, 3 hours in the traffic. And as you know, French and Italian, sometimes they get very heated. He's like, tonnerre, merde, c'est quoi ça? Oh, I'm in traffic. Oh, no. So he's like that, fuck Paris, Voilà. And he's like, finally, why do we invent technology? When I was on a horse a couple of 100 years ago, from point A to point B, it took me 3 hours to have maybe 100 kilometers. I created a car, or science created a car, to go faster, but now we're stuck in traffic. It's like we create the solution to create the problem. So we end up spending the same 3 hours distance, right? So it's the same analogy of what's the difference between 1776 and today.
And a lot of it has to do with how we choose to live, where we choose to live. Do we choose to live in populaces where there's cities, and now they've got the 15-minute cities, which is a whole nother conversation around slavery and structure and things like that. But there's a lot of turmoil and chaos in Haiti right now. Maybe fast forward from the history lesson.
Correct.
I don't know if the folks that are on this call really valued that, but that's massive history. Raghu has a similar understanding of history because he grew up in India, whole nother perspective. Okay. But it's very interesting to see when Raghu talks about versus what Bernardo talk about, how they go in, the simple steps of going in, conquering. It's very interesting to see how this happens, because we're gonna look at it from two different parts of the world, both of them connected by an ocean, but absolutely opposite parts, with similar time frames and similar strategy. Bernard, were you going to say something?
Right. I was going to say definitely, because what Rothschild did, and this is where to fast forward, when Rothschild found his way like a Epstein, he started with this thing to have leverage over politics, the same way they're doing with DC or the Democrats, or sorry to say. Which are the Democrats are the founding of KKK, by the way. The Republican has always been the party fighting for equality and justice in a way. So Toussaint had the blueprint because he did not believe, after defeating the three kingdoms, he invented the idea of republics. That means no having imperialistic or neocolonialism. He wanted to distribute power, so he created republics to distribute power to the people so people can redistribute it to the government. But Rothschild they copied Toussaint's republic. They modified with the laws and the banking laws and with their spies, and it made a copy. So as we know, a copy is never good as the original. Something that's made in USA, made in Germany, is never going to be something made in China will never be the same quality, for example. And this is where the problem is, because the model that the Rothschild took, and it came out of greed, where Toussaint's model came out of love, compassion, goodness, righteousness. But versus Rothschild, when he indebted the kingdoms in the late 1700s, 1800s, then you have the Battle of Waterloo. Rothschild sends his spy. The spy discovers that England won. But the spy goes back and tells Rothschild, okay, England won. So Rothschild, he had already power over the kingdoms because he had the debt over the kingdoms. But he wanted power over all the corporations to own the kingdom and the corporations. So in order to do that, he had to create the wars. And when he created the war, the stocks would go pennies on the dollars. That's why he got his foot in the corporations. So he bought England, all the corporations of England, all the corporations of France, with greed and wrongfully, and then Toussaint rightfully won all three kingdoms. So now Rothschild lose all three assets. It's like karma beat him. So now he has to do a plot with the Kingdom of France and Napoleon and the Kingdom of England to tell Toussaint, we're going to oblige and obey so you can come to France and England to be coronated as King of France and new King of England. And when he gets there, he gets arrested, he gets betrayed. And now they're studying his blood with the Red Cross. The Rothschilds, they're very good with science. The Zionists, they're very good with science. So the same way with Einstein, they took Toussaint Louverture's brain, they took his blood. They're doing, all types of experiments, genetically modified. And now we're discovering tunnels under Eastern Parkway with this, in New York City, tied to Little Children Museum. It's all tied to this in a way. So here we are.
It's crazy is back in the day, you sent me something this last week. I wonder if I can find it, but it basically goes through a slavery. Actually, send it to me on a recent channel if you've got it. It goes through and actually shows a slave that's for sale. Actually, you know what? I'll try and see if I can just see, because this is really, really telling. You know what I'm talking about, Bernard?
Yes, I remember that, but it was a while ago.
It's very interesting when you just take that kind of perspective and you layer it on today, because it's like, for many people, it's difficult to be able to realize and remember, or at least think through, how could one populace of humanity do something to control another populace? How could this actually happen? And I think I'm getting close here. And what I see when I looked at this was like, oh my goodness, there's not much difference from today than it was before. And the slavery and the control is just something that's literally, I've got to get this. You send me so much stuff, my goodness, buddy.
Yes, I know. And the slavery right now is because they're doing it through mind control. It's like they're doing it right in front of us and we're not even aware of it.
It just becomes commonplace, just normal.
It becomes commonplace. Yeah. We're not even aware of our birthrights. And if we look at things, really look at things, how come nature provides us everything for free? Oil, diamond, fruits, air, water. Nature doesn't give us an invoice, but we're invoicing each other unfairly, again, through the banking systems. The banking system decides which ones is giving loan, which ones should have enough. Whereas everything is in abundance. We're only here for about 80 years. There's nothing that's going to be scarcity. There's never going to be scarcity. But in our mind, it's an illness. We think of things with limitations. The earth has been here at least for 6,000 years. Some scientists say 6,000, some others say 6 million or whatever. But for whatever time it is, there's still things in abundance. We're going to leave, it's still going to be things, but we're creating scarcity in our mind. And because of that, there's poverty. Like the great Nelson Mandela said, poverty is man-made. Mm-hmm. Whatever is divine made is in abundance. Air, water, food grows in abundance. And whatever is in abundance doesn't come with an invoice. It doesn't come with a bill. It's for free. So we really have to balance this whole ecosystem. And I commend Michael for this amazing work he's doing. And I believe that blockchain is the single most best invention that will ever be made in humanity, because this is what's going to bring fairness. There's nothing better than it. Nothing better than it. Because we're going to be able to monetize everything that our contents, any little kid in Africa who is, putting something on YouTube, he'll be able to earn something. Right now, they're not earning it. So it really will bring stability.
I don't know about you, but I remember watching this one kid in particular who just does these dances to these cool songs, but he'll use things that he's got where it could be as simple as a rock, but he just makes such, and the adoption and the awareness, but you're spot on. I wonder if the monetization is actually there. One of the things that I wanted to kind of look at modern day realities and conflict around wars and rumors of wars to then unravel people, nation, tongues. You talked about the ability to divide and conquer. There's a reason why we all spoke different languages. It separated us. But now technology has been able to unite us. I mean, I can't tell you, I've literally traveled so many parts of the world over the last decade. I never had one problem. If I had an issue, I couldn't get an Uber, I just would use a little translator and I could get around. I could communicate with people. It's absolutely amazing. To some of the weirdest parts of the world. I mean, funkiest languages, deep inside of Saudi, deep inside of Russia, weird, not just first world countries either, but technology is able to bring the division of language and unite us. Travel is able to bring it together. Here in just another year, May 25th, 2025, if you do not have a real ID, if you don't have one of these things with the little gold stars on it, and all they do, so this little guy right here, for those that are not, so there's if you're not a part of the good old boys club that has the gold star, which behind this, if you really don't understand what this is, these actually have cryptographic systems that use a form of blockchain, but it's a centralized blockchain to actually use a third-party validator. So it doesn't really even matter what their name is. They have a whole nother identity that's being layered on it. And then when you link that real ID with banking information or social security information, you can now use artificial intelligence or machine learning to literally profile and enslave like we have not even understood. But what they're doing is they're going to lock down the travel. So people have been able to freely be able to travel. But if you don't have the real ID, you can't go in a governmental building. A governmental building is really tied to transportation as well as banking. So very important. That's why when we talk about using these systems, when we talk about blockchain, it's not necessarily blockchain. That is an element of what's underneath it around how technology can actually be adopted and used. I'm going to share my screen again and go through some advancements. We'll talk a little bit about, Texan. We'll talk a little bit about Haiti. We'll talk a little bit about BRICS. At the end, I'd like Raghu to talk a lot about the simple things of enjoying life together and partying. Once a month, we make a choice to purchase local. It was kind of like what Bernard was talking about. We can choose where we buy. He talked about products that were made in maybe Germany or the US and not being duplicated at the same quality within China. I would argue that it's an art to be able to duplicate. It's an art to be able to innovate. It's an art to be able to distribute. Those are all three different arts to gain adoption of a product. The patent system didn't even exist when the Americas were being formed. They actually created them when they left Britain to be able to do certain things to separate the intellectual property and then gain benefit and then start public markets. And then you had private companies that were innovating, being able to purchase this whole financial system. And when you really understand that financial system and some of the things that Bernard talked about, whether he's talking about debt versus interest versus assets and the combination, and then how you use bonds or treasury bonds to be able to fund countries, to be able to then have assets that can be matured within the countries. Because a lot of the different money creation goes around infrastructure, at least it should. That's the stuff that will actually have economic advancements. Maybe it's houses, maybe it's roads, maybe it's farming. And then if you actually do certain things locally, like what Bernard or Raghu will talk about, he's going to, hello and welcome. Welcome. So.
Okay, that's Henry Claude, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Perfect.
Yeah. So what we'll talk a little bit about, I'm just going to share my screen again for those that are, so this meeting is actually being recorded and is live for those that are not aware. Some of the newcomers may have, but at the end, we're going to,
Henry Claude.
We're going to talk a little bit about how shopping local and shopping with the local currency can actually be the difference. Out of all the crazy topics that we're discussing, how the simplicity of purchasing is actually really massive. So, Raghu will talk a little bit about that. To bring everybody up to speed, we're basically talking about the digital world, which is actually governed by technology or provides a platform or an operating system for humanity around governance, around identity, around finance, around land management, around asset management. We'll go into the details, but then it's actually being brought into lots of different parts of the world. Some look at them as countries, some look at them as kingdom, some look at them as states, maybe turning into countries. Some look at them as tribes, maybe just saying, you know what, leave us alone. We want to be sovereign. But we also want to be included and not just left behind, so to speak. So we're talking a little bit about how the digital world is actually a service provider within this oceanic coalition, which brings together multiple different types of ecosystems, whether they're service providers, whether they're kingdoms, whether they're nations, whether they're principalities, and helps the sea law, land law, air law actually be realized with a system that is very, very simple. This is an example of how the Hawaiian Kingdom can adopt it in such a way where they basically have an asset, and this asset in this region is actually the Hawaiian dala. So for those that are not aware, before the American dollar was used within the Hawaiian archipelago of islands, also known as the Hawaiian Kingdom, the Hawaiians had a dala. It was actually a real currency. It was a physical currency back in those days. But in effect, what's happened is it's a digital asset now, which can actually provide real-time transactions with no centralized system, such as a government or such as, I don't know if there's other moderators that have rights, but it would be wonderful. Let's see if I can just get over there. Oh, so Welcome back. So we're basically talking about how a system can actually free an individual so they have their own identity, but the transaction is real time, it's public, without a bank, without a government, and without the taxation structure. If ecosystems don't want to tax their people, they don't have to. If ecosystems don't want to pass merchant fees on to their merchants or their people, they don't have to. These transactions can actually use technology that is totally transparent and honest for the many. And then the countries can actually interface with one another. So it's not just, one ecosystem that stands up a dollar that is actually the centralized currency for the world. No. What you can do is just link the centralized currency value. So historically, actually, you know what? I'm going to find a slide because this is really, really applicable here. I wonder if this is it. It goes through the history of the standard currencies worldwide. Who were they? For instance, before Britain, way before it, you actually had Portugal. Let me see if I can find it real fast. Really, really valuable data. I don't know that I've got it right at my fingertips. Here we go. Beautiful. So when we look at this, you can see Portugal in the 1400s. About 80 years, they were the standard. Then Spain for about 110 years. Then Netherlands for 80 years. Then France for 95. Then Britain for 105. And then the US, be determined. But what we're showing you is how a Hawaiian dollar can actually be not only a centralized currency, but its own currency. The reason that it's actually centralized, or I should say used as a central reserve or a reserve currency, is because people adopt it. Right now, the Hawaiian dollar has near zero adoption. The US dollar has the global adoption, but many could argue that in 2017, the renminbi from China was actually what was purchasing or used to purchase oil out of the Middle East, maybe Saudi Arabia, maybe Iran, maybe India, maybe Russia, maybe some of the folks in this part of the world over here. But the point is this Hawaiian dollar that is unknown could literally be a standard if people just chose it. And that's why the ability to be able to choose or shop local is so important, because it's not just a Hawaiian dollar, but what about something in Texas? So for instance, what if we looked at, let's look at this one here. Let's look at a financial system within the Texas state, soon to be a country / nation of its own. What if it were to issue its own DILO? And that actually has the same properties where it can be transferred in real time. So you don't have the normal 2-day wait or day wait or wire fees or other issues with the SWIFT systems, but you literally have real-time transactions, no government, no bank, and really no fees. What if the ecosystem said, you know what, we want there to be fees, but we don't want there to be taxes? In the state of Texas today, as well as Florida and many others, they're saying, you know what, there is no income tax. You come here, you're not a slave. They may charge use tax or property tax or sales tax, or maybe a VAT tax or a visitor tax. But imagine an ecosystem where they actually just have a system that's adopted, and within the existing framework of what you currently know within Visa or MasterCard or Discover, less than what you would pay for those merchant fees could actually go and pay for that jurisdiction, that ecosystem to actually exist. So think about that for a second, tie it into, and this is not like it's fictitious. I mean, within this Hawaiian kingdom, you can actually go and download Hawaiian Life, which is an app. So this site is hawaiian.life, but you can download it on Apple or on Google or on any Clearphone and literally start transacting within this ecosystem. You can log into this ecosystem here. You can actually go and create a business. I'll show for some of the folks that this may be a new concept too that are joining this call for one of the first times. I'll go ahead and give you an example. So you light up either Hawaiian Life or Vanuatu Life or Tuvalu Life or Fiji Life or Saudi Life or Digital Life or Clear Life, and then you scan. Instead of using username and passwords, you actually just scan, it automatically logs you in. So now you can log into an ecosystem let's say this coffee company here, this coffee company can take certain assets, it can have certain members, it can have certain managers, it can have certain assets and certain, like today, if you register a business, you register a business within a jurisdiction. Maybe you get a business license within a city, within a county, within a state, within a province, but you don't get a business license within a country. Why not? You don't get a business license that goes cross-country from one country to another, but people may have customers in multiple jurisdictions. Why not? So this gives the ability, again, for those that are just starting to understand, the digital world, the whole jurisdiction is the whole earth. We all are one people on one world, on one earth, that we get the opportunity to either live together, to love one another in peace and joy, or we can fight, we can have wars, we can have despise, kind of like what's happening globally today. And I believe will continue to happen. We've seen it in different history books with different pride cycles and the things, the lessons that we learn in life. But it doesn't have to be that way. The currencies and reserve currencies that have historically been denominated within a particular currency is because of the value exchange. Because a human mind says, oh, a loaf of bread is worth 42 cents in this year. And with inflation, kind of like what Bernard was talking about, with inflation over time, because that's actually how debt gets serviced, which is a whole nother conversation, that price will go up, whether it's bread, whether it's eggs, whether it's gas, whether it's oil, whether it's a barrel of oil, whether it's honey, you name it, whether it's land. But the value that we talked about with a value of $1 and how it purchases a certain item tied to a commonality of what we understood within the region that we're in. Those regions are gone. The borders are gone. When we can translate from one language to another language, it's not just within the words and the vibrations that come from our mouths, but the ability to actually have real-time transactions. So for instance, let's go back into this country, into this organization that you can kind of see here. And you can see that this particular organization only has one asset, okay? So coffee. Let's go ahead and say that we wanted to create a different type of coffee within it. So we can create another asset, and it's got a different type of asset class. So maybe it's a private asset, maybe it's a public asset, maybe it's a currency, maybe it's roads or farms or infrastructure, maybe it's a type of collectible or reward program, like maybe for Marriott or for American Express or any reward that you're used to. Imagine those systems as well as assets, all of them working within one ecosystem where people can dynamically create them. So let's say that there's a natural resource, kind of like coffee. But what we're going to do is we're going to link this asset or currency to another currency that's out there. So imagine if you've actually got a lot of them that are linking, but they have the same value. So as fair market value or the value of the United States dollar either goes up or goes down, that's still to be determined. A lot of folks would say it because you just continue to print the unknown disclosed amount, which, by the way, in this ecosystem, and this is why Bitcoin was such a revolutionary asset for humanity. It's not that the math and the cryptography behind Bitcoin was valuable, but the ability to create a certain quantity of them, 21 million, and to have that distributed over a period of time and how people actually work to it. Now, in the Bitcoin ecosystem, it was actually locked. There was no more that could be created. But what about in a currency system where you can actually create more, but it has to have multi-signers that actually approve it? So imagine if you actually have the checks and balances within a new ecosystem that actually would be able to create a particular asset. So again, and I'll, if you want, what other thing would this, let's say they just sell mugs, okay? I don't even know how to spell mugs. Coffee. Don't drink coffee. Mugs. We'll call this mugs, okay? Let's go grab a mug. Image. So literally what we're doing is we're actually creating a, I don't want to do that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to come back over here. We're going to upload an image, our little mug image. Do we put it in downloads? Hmm. And let's just create 21 of these mugs and let's not lock it, or 210. So we'll kind of give you an understanding here. So I'm going to actually, and for those that don't understand what we're doing, we're actually using technology to identify individuals cryptographically so they can own their own data, their own identity, and prove who they are better than the centralized systems without losing their own identity. So what we did within this coffee company is we actually created an asset called mugs. So you have coffee and then mugs, right? Now, this is not actually issued. You would actually go through a process of issuing it here. But what we can see that just happened is notice this reputation score of 400 for this organization called, Kona Coffee. And you see how it only has one asset here. So what we'll do is we'll go and refresh that. And now you can see that there's these mugs. If we were to distribute that asset down to a wallet and then send it to other people, you can actually see where those went. So what we're talking about are not just in the digital world some fictitious thing, but or in a coalition of different organizations that come together, but with different parts and pieces of jurisdictions that choose to be a part of this can actually free their citizens or their nationals to be able to operate independently on their own, owning their own assets and what we call life cycle management. So a good example would be and this may have some complications and people may not understand this, but as the state of Texas stands up as its own country or nation, as a Texan nation per se, and let's say that they're two separate entities, right? They can actually afford their nationals to be able to have an identity that has a financial system, an identity system, an asset management system, a banking system, a company registration system, and assets, along with vehicle management. So it's not just like, well, okay, in life we have a home, we have vehicles, we have vessels, we have land, but what do we do? How we're working hard for it. How does it actually pass from one generation to another? Well, many folks don't understand this, but each state actually gets hundreds of millions of dollars in assets every year that go unclaimed because of death. Probate. People don't understand that when people actually pass away, to transfer assets from one to another without certain access to keys and codes, it's non-existent. But in this ecosystem, not only the asset, but the registration and the actual plates can all be in public. Everyone can see them, but the identity behind it can actually be masked. So an example is, if you look at this, I don't know if I've got identities inside of here. Let's see if we do. Yeah, so here's an example of a registration. Here's an example of a birth certificate. Notice how over here you don't actually see, so this is the digital copy. You don't actually see the sex or the date of birth or the last name, but you can see a photo and you can see a first name, but you don't understand a last name. But if this individual, let's say they're driving and they get pulled over and the officer scans their plate, they can see what their prior plate was. They can see if it's stolen, if it's insured, if it's financed, who has the rights to drive the vehicle, who owns the vehicle, because it may be fluid, right? They may be on renting a vehicle. Like, I don't know if you've ever used like Twilio, or maybe it's even like in the housing world. It's like, you've got a lot of systems that are starting to automate things, whether it's Zillow, whether it's Airbnb, whether it's at the vehicle level. You start getting these systems that starts automating it. But how do you actually know who owns it or controls it or manages it? Well, in this process, an officer would actually click a button and the individual, without giving the officer their phone, would actually be able to validate that that's who they are, show their photo, show their last name, et cetera, if it's appropriate. If not, they don't have to, but they can still verify it. So it gives control back to the individual, which in a country like what we're talking about with Haiti, or these developing countries of Vanuatu or Tuvalu, I'll go pull up a real list here. So Tuvalu is the least traveled country in the whole world today. Like literally, it's just in the middle of nowhere. Wonderful people, wonderful culture, but it's very difficult to get there. Hawaii, Vanuatu, Samoa, some of these countries are in some ways still in developing phases, especially Vanuatu. I would even say Fiji. I would even say Tonga, Samoa, Kiribati. These are all countries that are all still developing, but in many ways, they're very free. And so when we start looking, or maybe you could even look at Aotearoa separating from New Zealand, it'll be a free country or ecosystem. It's up to others to be able to say, do we recognize it? So would the Kingdom of Hawaii recognize the Kingdom of Aotearoa or the Kingdom of Haiti, etc.? So it's not up to a centralized United Nations to say we're going to recognize these things or not recognize them, but it's about adoption. And one of the things we're seeing in the world today is BRICS. We're seeing each one of these different countries here joining and standing up with saying, you know what? The centralized things that we've seen within these types of currencies and controls with these reserve currencies are not going to be the standard in the future. We will take our value, we will take our currencies, we will take our systems, and we will join together in such a way where we will actually recognize one another. So this isn't asking for the blessing of the United Nations to say that China exists or certain parts of South Africa. We all know these countries are solid, stable. They have their own economies, they have their own currencies, they have their own assets, they have their own cultures. But together they become stronger. The question is, will they use systems that are using technology like what the digital world enables? And really the body that we have here, not only the people that are on this particular call, but we need to ask ourselves, do we actually want to be a service provider within this new ecosystem of BRICS? Or do we want to be a part of it as a member that has a jurisdiction that may be the whole earth, and membership or citizens or residents or nationals that are still small and growing? But we all know, we all understand that the future will become centrally controlled digitally or decentralized. So in other words, if technology is going to be something that we actually all adopt to identify ourselves, who owns the encryption keys? Who controls the data? If it is centrally controlled, we will never be free. If we think that what Bernard was talking about with slavery 200 years ago was difficult, and we feel like we're hamsters on that wheel and slaves today just going around in circles, but we may not have a chain around our ankle like back 200 years ago. But we do have a form of control. If we think that today is difficult, wait until the systems that are centralized systems using technology actually get deployed and are in force. They're not in force today, but they're standing them up all around us. So with that being said, I think it's important to talk about not just what we're dealing with and seeing today, but also what could be tomorrow. And Raghu is one of the most brilliant minds I've ever met. The way he was brought up, the way he was raised, the way he was cherished, the way he was taught, and I would say the way that he thinks is something that humanity can actually learn from. He's an individual that has gone and created what's called the shopping party, a political party that was actually recognized with individuals running on a political party that would run for president of the United States of America. The gentleman that actually took the last poll was Brock Pierce, and he was directly enabled by Raghu, who's joined us today. Raghu has some very interesting and simple approaches to really solving some of these perplexing issues that history has actually talked about. And kind of like Bernard, Raghu loves to go through history and understanding it to be able to create a formula and simplicity for the future. So Raghu, if you want to jump through some of the topics, namely the ones that I think are massively important are the simple topics around we buy local with a local currency. So maybe if you could go through some of those elements, and then we'll just open it up for general Q&A or questions or thoughts. I think you might be on mute.
There we are.
There you go.
You've covered and touched upon so many elements. And in getting into the technical, you have passed over the central. And the easiest summary of explaining that central element of value, because we're talking about currencies and how do we get adoption and how do we find the correlation between values and services? What's the interface? And this is really come into focus because you've provided all the other elements. Your technology is it's not one of the first times, it's the first time in human history where you have laid out the technology, not just the technology platform that's not as good as today's present colonial system, but better. This has never happened before. And so now we're getting to trying to understand what creates that interface. So here you've created this amazingly powerful program, and it's still not getting the immediate traction that it's not so much that it deserves, it's that it's just the best platform out there. And so let me see if I'm going to start off with the micro, and then we'll get into the macro and see if we can tie it all together. This is the first time I'm putting all of these elements together because you've touched upon so many of them. And so the micro is, we get together one day a month, we buy locally made. Here in Hawaii is one of the greatest exponentials of leverage. So if we can get as little as 15% of the people, to about 300,000 people, they show up and say, we're buying local today. We would be able to get probably the majority of the stores to jump aboard and say, okay, we will carry local. Now, the impact of that is significant, and this is something that we can find a duplication in pretty much any place else in the world. But Hawaii offers two factors, it's actually three, but the first of them is that I think it's down to 7 million, but it used to be 10 million tourists a year. And so if we got as little as, 10%, what to speak of 20 or 30%, that would be 1, 2, or 3 million tourists buying locally based business products. That would scale our small businesses. I mean, not to sound too over the top for people, I say it's a double and triple or quadruple of our small businesses. I actually think it would be closer to 1,000%. So it's not just tourists, but these are the premium luxury buyers of the world coming here. So we have a leverage here that you're just not going to get in Michigan, or you're not going to get out in Pennsylvania. And somewhat you won't even quite get in New York, simply because we used to have 10 times more luxury premium tourist buyers than we do in population. And so it's just mind-boggling, the potential right there. So what really sort of set my hand off, what tipped my hand about that scope was that originally started off with recognizing that consumers themselves are the replacement to what unions used to be in the last century. So back in the 19th century, or actually that was the 20th century, businesses were confined nationally. And so the unions could go and beat up on the corporations and say, well, you're going to have to pay or we're going to shut you down. Now, once corporations went transnational, unions have lost their effect, which is multiplying with each year. Now they're transnational. So the counterpart to them is no longer unions or labor or even capital. their counterpart is the consumer. And so the American Shopping Party was based upon the premise that the greatest consumer group in the world by far was the American consumer. Now that is shifting dramatically just in the last 5 years, but we still have a small window of being a global power on the consumer side. And it allows us an effectiveness that far exceeds the power that unions had. So it's really about sort of building that out on a global basis, starting here in the US. Our formula was that it takes as little as only 15% of the Americans dedicated to buying American-made one day a month. And then you would have every store in the US committed to carrying something American-made. But then when I looked at Hawaii, I was like, Hawaii has 10 times the number of buyers with their tourists in the local, and I was like, we got to do it here. So we have it's not a leverage, it's an exponential with the tourists. I mean, it's not just an exponential in terms of the number of people buying, it's an exponential in the amount of money that they have to spend for it. Now, the next one that came in, which was even more just absolutely thrilling, was that it just turns out that the new luxury item is food. Food is the new luxury item, and the best thing about food as a product is that it's a high consumable. So you can go and spend $3,000, you know, on one of those Chanel purses. It's a one-time, you know, might get two of them, possibly three. $3,000 is $250 a month. I mean, people are going to spend $250 a month on food anyway. And what makes Hawaii unique is not just that it's food, but it's the premium of foods. So a lot of people don't know this, but in Japan, they have a $200 melon. It's an artisan melon. There's nothing really special about it. So then you have this whole world of how much variables of value added in food. So of course there's the critical need, but really the single greatest marketing side for food today is twofold. On the one side, it's just really important for the big boys to layer on as many poisons as possible into the foods. Then on the other is that the cost of food, actually it's not the cost of food, the supply of food is imploding at a rate that it is, for the most part, the vast majority of the people do not recognize at the rate that our food supply is collapsing.
By design, all by design.
Even without the design, even if they weren't intentionally shutting down or, you know, the manufacturing, even without the contrivances there, it's just so all they're doing is expediting what actually one of the single greatest factors outside their manipulation is that the bulk of our so-called food, what do you call it? Cornucopia. I mean, in history, it's been very rare that on a global scale, we've had this much food, and it came from petroagriculture, where they were they just scaled up production so massively. They were throwing, I know it's tons of food. I believe it's either tens of thousands or possibly millions of tons of food they were throwing out to keep the price from just completely imploding. So that is coming to an end, and the rate of return is. So when you put all these elements together, and we've crossed, we outlined about 8, depending on how you want to break it down, it could be as many as 12. Why the food is imploding? On the one side, you have foods just becoming. I mean, it's not about that they're poisonous anymore. It's about at what rate they're going to kill you. You know, when I was growing up, you know, you had Fritos and, you know, you're going to be obese and, you know, you're going to have a heart attack at 50. now with the GMOs, then the level of poisons, of insecticides and fertilizers, and that's on a good day. Now they're throwing in a bunch of other chemicals that, you know, destroy the myelin on your yeah. So anyway, we have these two things going on at play. Meanwhile, Hawaii is coming in as the premium product food line. And this also coincides with everyone sort of having got out of their system to buy the hot clothes and the computers and the cars and the phones. And the only thing primarily left now is your health and food. So Hawaii is in this extraordinary position. And we have 700,000 acres of the world's best land ready to go. And just when the tourism, which has buffered Hawaii, the Hawaii economy has collapsed. So we went from 15 billion a year to just 10 billion a year with tourism just in the last 3 years. In spite of that, they still will not. So what we were asking for, so this is what the American Shopping Party was asking for. And it was just, I mean, it's not that it was simple and easy. It's just fun. Let's get together one day a month, throw a party, celebrate the best of who we are, buy locally made, right? 300,000 people. And the reason why we went 15% is because several reasons. The number one reason is that the US economy is so massive. And the amount of money that we spend is just, I mean, it's a $20 trillion economy and 70% of that's consumption based. So just 15% of the people spending just one day a month is more than enough in order to jumpstart our local economy. So it's just like during Gandhi's day when he decided to throw the British out, this is really just the Gandhi program, buy locally made, you know, scale up our small businesses, get people to make that commitment. They really had to do sort of like an all or nothing, like you could not buy British goods because their scale of consumption was so small. Our consumption is so massive that one day a month is more than enough in order to jumpstart our local economy. And here in Hawaii, you can see where it's not double, triple, quadruple. It's probably looking at between 500, 1,000%. Whatever it might be, it's more than enough to keep everybody happy and build this out. So buy locally made. So the problem that we ran into was when we talked about buying local, the first pushback I got was from small businesses, and they were like, you know, it's great that we have the local people buying, but first we would have more than enough money. So that's where we now developed the focus on getting the stores in. Then we went to the farmers. Farmers were like, we don't have a problem selling. Our problem is we can't scale fast enough to keep up with the demand. And so the two primary things, of course, was infrastructures of support, and that's across all 4 areas, which is scaling, infrastructure, capital, and then exports. And then interfacing. So that's when we came in with the political, this is where we became a political party versus just a consumers movement that we started off with. And the consumer side was, the political side was, we want just 1% of the budget. Give us 1% of the budget. And that will take care. So Hawaii, the state budget alone is about 20 billion a year. We just want 200 million. And we're not even asking for it every year. We just want it, you know, 1 year, put in 1%. And the amount of bureaucratic fumbling, like it's really complicated for them. So what we wanted to do is just get, you know, get 5,000, 20,000, 50,000 people to show up in the Capitol and say, I'm sorry, guys, if you can't figure out that we have this horrific disaster coming down the road with the food supply, irrespective of the US dollar, irrespective of the oil falling or the US dollar falling, or going to war with Russia, or going to war with China, or, you know, the world supply chain breaking up, whatever those are. And so our point was, it is likely I mean, I've been studying this now for almost 40 years. It is likely that by this summer, we're going to have our food supply squeeze. And there's only going to be two kinds of countries in the world. There's going to be those that don't have food and those that offer it. And we have about 6 months, on a good day, maybe a year. And 1% is all it will take in order to do it. Anyway, so that's the micro. Mike, how am I doing for both time
You're good.
and
You're good. What we're going to do, maybe if we can, is we'll continue this conversation on the next town hall, which will be next Tuesday. There are two individuals here that I'd love to have their perspective and feedback, primarily because they've never heard this before. But Bernard, thank you for joining us, as well as your guest. Is there any kind of perspectives or feedback that you may have based upon what you're hearing or seeing?
The feedback I'm seeing is
You're getting pretty choppy.
things and to bring equilibrium to lives and freedom.
Your
So,
connection, we didn't hear anything that you said.
I'd like to have
There
Henry open what he does. Oh, what about now?
We heard what you say, what about now? But that's the first thing we're hearing. So I think you may be fine now. Go ahead.
Okay, it should be better.
Maybe if you could just restate what you just said, that would be great.
Okay. Right. No, I said all I've heard. First, this will help Haiti greatly to get Haiti out of poverty and to get business running more efficiently, and to allow a farm in remote areas to have peer-to-peer transactions and bring transactions to them. So this is really something amazing. And I also see it will facilitate Haiti to have access to foreign markets, and foreign markets to have access to Haiti's products, niche products. And thank you, Raghu, for saying, for sharing this information, and for reiterating the urgency for the food supply, which also I've been saying and promoting for the last 17 years.
You've also had,
with the blockchain, I believe.
you've also talked about the
Yep, go ahead.
value of Haiti being a remote ecosystem that has good weather, that has a really good growing environment, and growing healthy, super premium foods like moringa and other types of food that is unique and valuable for the human body, for life and for health and vitality. And that's independent of all this food issue and independent of the things we're dealing with today. But, and I think what Raghu is talking about that really resonates with me, and I thought it would with you, is one, the ability to be independent and sovereign, but at the same time be able to transact. So for instance, like Tuvalu, some of their value and benefit is they've got 100,000 square miles of ocean. And so what they do is they sell for $10,000 a day the rights to ship in their, or to fish in their ocean. So it's not just what you can grow on the land, but it's these ecosystems that have their own jurisdictions control what's under the land, in the soil, in the minerals, in the rights, what flows on the land or grows on the land, whether it's water rights or agricultural type things, or maybe housing, and then what's in the frequencies above the earth as well. When they understand that, and they understand asset management and the ability to do value exchange with it, like you hit it right on the head when we were talking about the debt versus the assets and the interest in the middle. When we take that, because for instance, that's a Western mentality, but when we look at the Middle East, like with Islam type banking, they don't do interest the same way. It's actually it's against the law to do it the same way. Has it all been held? But the point that I'm driving at is those boats in the Tuvalu waters, when their ship transponders actually hit the GPS that they're in their waters, they're charging them $10,000 a day. And that can be paid real time and validated real time when you automate the processes like this. So it's a matter of saying, Technology is not the enemy. Digital ecosystems are not the enemy. It's the way that it is irresponsibly deployed and then controls the people that is what is evil. And really, all this battle is all about just good versus evil. That's what it's light versus dark. That's what it all comes down to. And the ability for one to control another is evil. The ability for one to have a power that takes away a choice over another is not right. And I'm not saying that all of humanity is perfect, but if we can identify that and then figure out how to make it right, and whether it's changing the environment and in systems that we're in by intelligently organizing technology to say, back to Raghu's point, all we have to do is choose what we're going to buy and maybe buy local instead of buying something that was shipped in versus buying it on a local currency versus a centralized currency that may have some type of a, for instance, people may not know this, but in the China ecosystem, the renminbi has two value points to it: what is current inside the country and what is export external to the country. They actually have their own exchange sides of it, and it's regulated by the government. And what that does is it puts the government, if you read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, they spell out that all they have to do is the long game of investing in manufacturing and then building up their society so that their citizens, if you will, slash slaves, are actually providing, and I shouldn't say it that way because the people of China are such amazing people. I mean, before COVID broke out, I was there personally. I took some family members. It was just, their hearts are as pure as I've ever seen a culture's. Whether oppression is realized or real, that's a different story. But the value of what technology can actually layer into these different countries provides a system where normalcy and transparency can be realized. And it's invaluable. It's the ability to not have to file a tax, the ability to have things get paid for in real time and to unwind it and to have a transaction. For instance, one of the pilots that we're doing within a country, they have a retirement system and a taxation system that's kind of already built in. It's like what they call a superannuation fund and a trust fund, because the lands are not owned by people, they're leased, and then the funds get spent out. But that's actually how their what would be equivalent of their social security system actually gets paid. So this pilot is, when a transaction happens, let's say a hotel room is purchased, everyone gets paid. The company that's managing it, let's say it's Marriott. The company that owns the actual buildings, let's say it's a superannuation fund. Let's say, everybody that basically has their piece of it all gets paid in real time. And then let's say that the user says, you know what, I didn't like my room, it smelled like this or whatever. They get their money back, their value back, their currency back. It actually can claw it back from the sources that actually was sent, and the transaction is all in one system. This is not something that is like futuristic. This can be done today. And all we're doing is talking about the simple things that Raghu just mentioned. Buy local, buy interlocal currency. That currency can be pegged to the same value exchange or dollar. So for instance, let's say in the Caribbean, the Eastern Caribbean, there are 7 or 9, actually 9 different countries, nations that have come together to create one asset. Now, that asset then peers at a certain dollar amount to the US dollar as a value exchange. It's like $3.12, something like that. But imagine in Haiti, if Haiti were to issue its own currency, and they figure out, the value exchange per se to equal $1 and then peg it. It's just kind of like what we did earlier when we created this asset. I don't know if you were on when we created the cups within the coffee company. But technology without humans in the middle of it manipulating or controlling it, and trust is technology that can be audited and trusted. Like I believe that the stock markets in the United States of America, whether it's the New York Stock Exchange, the Frankfurt Exchange, any of them that use certain types of puts and calls and EFTs, they can literally those things can be manipulated in real time. So it's a matter of having a system that removes the transparency, but then interacts with those systems in an honest, upright way. Those are the areas where people can then start saying, we don't have to riot in the streets like what's going on in Haiti today. We can actually start trusting a system because we know that there's not manipulation with the system. A large portion of the people is going to say, you know what, that's not my reality. That may be your perception, or that may be what's actually happening, but I don't believe it. Like there was a lady on a couple calls ago. She's like, if it's technology, I don't want to do anything with it. I just want to use my dollars, my currency. I just want to use everything in cash. I'm like, well, to the point, if you're doing everything in a certain cash and currency that's tied to a system where it's manipulated and just printed without any kind of understanding, or better yet, let's just say these two things happen. One, world war happens within the next 12 months or 18 months. Okay. Two, at the end of these world wars, cash is not something that is commonplace anymore. You have systems that are fully digital, and they will literally be buying back all of the cash as a part of them standing up a new ecosystem again. Like I say, most of us have never been through real war. When we understand what happens in war, for instance, that same system that I mentioned that is going on in Ukraine right now, that reset in Ukraine, it was funded by Visa Foundation and the United States of America before Russia even invaded. DIA, D-I-I-A, go look it up. They have over 20 million active users, and literally their identity, their driver's license, their passport, their bills, their utilities, even reporting somebody that has a drone or a missile or something that's going on in real time is used in this system. And the biggest underscoring point that I'm trying to make, they have no currency. It's 100% digital is where the whole thing's going to go. So when the wars are coming to an end and the dust settles, if currencies like cash dollars are no longer used, imagine the control that humanity could have over it. You can't travel. If you travel in your money, if you don't think a certain way or vote a certain way or do a certain way or act a certain way, and you're not in their game on their rules, your currency could actually disappear. Your currency you couldn't use it. If you traveled a certain way, or maybe if you didn't spend it in a certain period of time, like they can literally control. Like think about it. We all live in capital controls right now as it is today. Can you go to the bank and take out $5,000 in cash if you had it in there? Nah, it's like $500 is the max of a daily limit. You can call the bank and say, I want it to be $7,000, and it doesn't matter. They're not going to let you do it. Are you understand what I'm saying? These are capital controls that are global. It's not just China that's doing capital controls. So the question is, how can we as individuals actually make a difference? How can we come together in such a way where there's systems like BRICS, where there's systems like a coalition that can pull together different ecosystems and counterbalance the current systems that are out there? How can we all work together to create a system that is actually better for humanity, that lets nations that are standing up, that may be new nations, maybe it's small nations that are out there, maybe it's developing nations that are standing up and separating from current systems that are there, maybe it's current kingdoms that are actually already in control of their environments, but they've been in a developing stage where they can't actually stand up. Or maybe it's a state within a country that says enough is enough. We're going to govern ourselves, and we're going to do it in a way that is responsible, and it provides liberty. The liberties that the country of the United States stood for at one time, they're saying they don't exist anymore. So we have to be responsible and accountable to have that liberty again. So the goal is, how do we actually gain alignment of such a reality with all of these different wars and rumors of wars or speculation of wars coming, and knowing that wars is actually how adoption is forced on societies? Because right now, life is good. It's a quiet before the storm. People may say, no, there's so much turmoil and there's so much death. But when we really look at it, in the Second World War, almost 61 million people perished from a consequence of the war. Right now, we're talking maybe 50 to 55,000 people. I'm not saying that not one of those lives are important, but what I am saying is it's important for us to understand that together united, we can do anything, but divided, as we are starting to be. To your point, you talked about, the spying, the blackmail, the dividing, and then the conquering. That's a recipe for societies to be taken over that has been propagated over and over and over again. So with that being said, any closing comments from anybody, or any questions or thoughts or feedback?
I'd like Henry Claude to present himself, what he does, and real quick.
Okay, Henry, it's all yours, bud. You're still on mute, just to give you a heads up. Henry?
Is Henry Wally?
No, Henry's the Haiti Drone Services.
Right, you're on mute.
Tell you what, we'll just open it up for general questions while we're waiting for him to come. Anybody have thoughts or feedback or questions?
All right, let me just say in conclusion to my presentation is that what we were talking about was the macro adoption, the macro steps. What part two of that was, the micro steps. The part two of that was the macro, and that is the interface. How do you create that interface? What is that value? And that value is best captured through native traditions. And so that's what we'll talk about next time. So we keep talking about it as a matter of reconnecting with our roots and, getting away from colonialism. No, that is the foundational missing piece to a currency's value. And so we'll cover that in our next, because it's not an incidental. It is the foundational piece to everything else. And to that next time for part two.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting how going back to the roots of exactly what you talked about, Bernard, before, this earth gives us things without an invoice. All we have to do is nurture it, plant the seed, till the soil, water it. I don't even think we need to weed it, because I think some of these food forests can actually grow food better than monocropping. But the ability to actually use our own efforts and sweat or value exchange from others that don't want to be out in the field, so to speak, but getting to those roots of who we are as a race that actually connects with this earth, the soil, the life that can actually give us life, real life, not some, fake juice in a bottle that's not healthy for us. Our bodies are amazing. And I really believe that natural vitality and peace and joy comes from the things that we put into our bodies, whether it's through our mouth or through our eyes or our ears. And I want to underscore that it's not a physical war, black and white, that this is all about. It's a spiritual battle that we're actually in. And so it's not just a matter of what we put in our bodies through our mouth, but what we also think and feel and hear, and vibration and sound and song. They have a lot to do with it. Prayer, some people would call it quantum entanglement. The ability to communicate and connect spiritually is really a big part of what this battle is all about, that we all get to live in and be a part of. So we'll go ahead and wrap up today. It sounds like, unless the gentleman's here, Bernard, that you wanted to speak. Should we just
Henri Claude, can you hear us? Henri Claude, you're on mute. Can you hear us? Henri Claude?
We'll go ahead and wrap up and just plan for next time. Raghu,
Okay.
Bernard, thank you for joining us. We look forward to meeting this other gentleman and all of those that always have just continually been with us. We're grateful for your time and your attendance, and we'll plan on seeing you next week, same time, same place. Much love.